March 27th, 1999, 36,000 feet above the Vojvodina plains of northern Serbia. The night sky stretched black and infinite. Lieutenant Colonel Darrell Zelko sat cocooned inside the cramped cockpit of his F-117A Nighthawk, callsign Vega 31. The instrument panel glowed faint green against his face. Outside, nothing but darkness. No stars, no moon, just the kind of void that swallowed sound and light and, theoretically, radar waves. Zelko had flown combat missions before, but tonight felt different. No escort fighters, no electronic warfare aircraft jamming enemy radars, no wild weasels hunting surface-to-air missile sites ahead of him. Just him, alone, riding the most advanced stealth aircraft ever built into the heart of enemy airspace. The Nighthawk's angular, faceted skin, designed to scatter radar energy in every direction except back to its source, was supposed to make him invisible, a ghost. He checked his navigation display. The target, a command and control facility on the outskirts of Belgrade, the nerve center coordinating Serbian air defenses across the region. Intelligence had confirmed it was operational, directing SAM batteries and interceptors against NATO strike packages. Taking it out would blind a significant portion of Serbia's integrated air defense system. It was a high-value target, worth the risk. Operation Allied Force was now in its fourth day. NATO's air campaign against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia had begun with overwhelming force, cruise missiles, stealth bombers, waves of strike fighters. The objective: compel Serbian President Slobodan Milosevic to withdraw his forces from Kosovo and end the ethnic cleansing. But the Serbs were proving resilient. Their air defences, though aging, were disciplined and adaptive. They moved their SAM systems frequently, used decoys, employed strict emissions control. They were learning. Zelko adjusted his grip on the stick. The Nighthawk handled like a brick with wings stable but unforgiving. Its fly-by-wire system kept it from tumbling out of the sky, but it demanded respect. He trained for years to master it. Fewer than 100 pilots in the world were qualified to fly the F-117. It was a privilege, a responsibility. The pre-flight briefing had been routine: weather, clear, threat level, moderate. Expected opposition: mobile SAM systems, primarily SA 3 seconds and SA 6 seconds, older Soviet-era hardware. The intelligence officer had been confident. "They won't see you coming," he'd said. "Just get in, drop your payload, and get out." Zelko had nodded. He believed it. The Nighthawk had flown dozens of missions over Iraq during Desert Storm, without a single loss. It had become a symbol of American technological dominance, invisible, untouchable. He glanced at the mission clock. 12 minutes to target. He began his descent, easing the throttle back, letting the Nighthawk sink through the cold night air. The bombing run would take him directly over Belgrade's outer defences. He'd approach from the northwest, release his 2 GBU-27 laser-guided bombs, then bank hard east and egress back toward friendly airspace over Bosnia. The radio was silent. Zelko preferred it that way. Less chatter meant fewer distractions. He ran through his mental checklist: weapons armed, targeting pod online, countermeasures ready. Everything green. Below him, the landscape was a patchwork of shadow. Small towns glowed faintly scattered streetlights, the occasional vehicle. Most of Serbia was blacked out, a defensive measure against NATO's precision strikes. But Zelko didn't need to see the ground. His infrared targeting system painted the world in shades of grey and white. He could identify buildings, roads, vehicles. He could find his target. 8 minutes out. He felt the familiar tightness in his chest, not fear, exactly, but heightened awareness. Combat sharpened the senses. Every sound, every vibration, every flicker of the instruments became significant. He was alone, but he wasn't helpless. The Nighthawk carried no guns, no air-to-air missiles. It was a bomber, pure and simple. But it had one weapon no enemy could counter: invisibility. Or so he thought. Far below, in a farmer's field 20 miles south of Belgrade, another man was watching the sky. Lieutenant Colonel Zoltan Dani stood beside his command vehicle, binoculars pressed to his eyes, scanning the darkness above. Around him, his crew worked in disciplined silence. The SA-3 Goa missile battery NATO designation for the Soviet S-125 Neva system was fully deployed. 6 missiles sat on their launchers, pointed skyward like accusing fingers. The P-18 Spoonrest early warning radar rotated slowly, its dish sweeping the horizon. The SNR-125 Fire Dome tracking radar remained silent, powered down, invisible to NATO's radar hunting aircraft. Dani lowered the binoculars. He was 44 years old, a career air defense officer who'd spent 2 decades mastering the art of shooting down aircraft with equipment the Americans considered obsolete. The S-125 had entered service in 1961. It was older than most of his crew, but Dani had learned something the textbooks didn't teach. Old didn't mean useless, it meant underestimated. The Americans thought they owned the night. Their stealth bombers, the F-117 seconds, had become legends after the Gulf War. Invisible to radar, they struck with impunity. NATO planners assumed the same would hold true over Serbia. They were wrong. Dani had been studying the F-117 for years. He'd read every piece of intelligence he could find, analyzed every mission profile, studied every photograph. He understood the aircraft's strengths and its weaknesses. Stealth wasn't magic, it was physics. The Nighthawk's faceted design deflected radar energy, but only at certain frequencies. Lower frequencies, like those used by older Soviet systems, could sometimes detect it, especially at close range. The aircraft also had to open its bomb bay doors before releasing weapons, briefly compromising its radar cross-section. But detection alone wasn't enough. Dani needed a firing solution, and for that, he needed discipline, patience, and a little bit of luck. His battery had been playing a deadly game of cat and mouse with NATO for 4 days. They never stayed in one position for more than a few hours. They moved at night, set up in unexpected locations, farm fields, orchards, residential areas, places NATO wouldn't expect a SAM system. They used strict emissions control, keeping their radars off until the last possible moment. When NATO's radar-hunting aircraft came looking, they found nothing but empty fields and decoys. Tonight, Dani had positioned his battery along one of the known ingress routes into Belgrade. Intelligence suggested NATO would strike targets in the capital. The F-117 seconds always came at night, always alone, always from the northwest, predictable. His radar operator, a young sergeant named Anisic, sat hunched over his scope inside the command vehicle. The P-18 radar was operating in passive mode, listening for electronic emissions rather than actively transmitting. It was a trick Dani had learned from the Russians. Let the enemy's own systems betray them. Anything? Dani asked, climbing into the vehicle. Anisic shook his head. Negative, sir. Standard NATO jamming on the usual frequencies. Nothing solid. Dani checked his watch. 20:37 local time. If the Americans were coming, it would be soon. He lit a cigarette, the flame briefly illuminating his weathered face. His crew thought he was crazy. Hunting stealth aircraft with a 40-year-old missile system was like hunting tigers with a musket. But Dani believed. He'd spent his entire career preparing for this moment. Switch to long wave, he said quietly. Anisic hesitated. Sir, that'll reduce our range significantly. Do it. The sergeant adjusted the radar's frequency, dropping it into the VHF band. The scope flickered, then stabilized. Lower frequencies had longer wavelengths, less precision, but they could sometimes pick up targets that higher frequencies missed. It was a gamble. Minutes passed. Dani smoked. The crew waited. Then Anisic stiffened. Contact. Bearing 320, range 40 kilometers. Slow mover, high altitude. Dani leaned over the scope. A faint blip appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Intermittent, weak, but there. Could be a decoy, Anisic said. Or it could be a Nighthawk. Danny's pulse quickened. Track it. Don't go active yet. The blip moved across the scope, heading southeast, directly toward Belgrade. The speed was right subsonic, around 600 knots. The altitude was right high, probably above 30,000 feet. And the signature was wrong for any conventional aircraft. Too small, too faint. Danny made his decision. Prepare to engage. Spin up the fire dome. His crew moved instantly. The SNR-125 tracking radar powered up, its dish locking onto the target's bearing. This was the moment of maximum vulnerability. The moment the fire dome went active, every NATO aircraft within 100 miles would know exactly where they were. They'd have minutes, maybe seconds, before the counterstrike came. The tracking radar locked. The blip solidified on the scope. Target acquired, Anisic reported, his voice tight. Range 32 kilometers. Altitude 11,000 meters. Danny stared at the screen. This was it. This was the shot. Launch 2 missiles. 5-second interval. The first SA-3 roared off its rail at 2042, a column of white fire tearing into the night sky. 5 seconds later, the second followed. The missiles accelerated to Mach 3.5, their radar seekers guiding them toward the invisible target above. Danny watched them climb, 2 bright stars ascending into darkness. 36,000 feet above, Darrell Zelko saw the launch. The cockpit warning system erupted in a cacophony of alarms. Zelko's eyes snapped to the threat display. 2 missiles inbound, SA 3 seconds, tracking him. Impossible. The word flashed through his mind, even as his hands moved instinctively. He slammed the throttle forward, threw the Nighthawk into a hard banking turn, punched the chaff and flare dispensers. Aluminum strips and magnesium flares burst into the slipstream behind him, useless against radar-guided missiles, but it was all he had. The Nighthawk wasn't built for evasive maneuvers. It was a bomber, not a fighter. Its stealth came from careful shaping and radar-absorbent materials, not speed or agility. Zelko pulled harder on the stick, feeling the G-forces press him into his seat. The aircraft shuddered, protesting. He had seconds, maybe less. The first missile passed beneath him, its proximity fuse failing to detonate, a miss. But the second was tracking perfectly, adjusting its trajectory, closing the distance at 3 times the speed of sound. Zelko saw the flash before he felt the impact, a brilliant white explosion that turned night into day. The missile detonated 15 feet below the Nighthawk's left wing, and the shockwave hit like a sledgehammer. The aircraft lurched violently. Shrapnel tore through the fuselage, shredding hydraulic lines, severing control cables, puncturing fuel tanks. The cockpit filled with smoke and the acrid smell of burning electronics. Every warning light on the panel flashed red. The flight control system screamed failure warnings. The Nighthawk rolled inverted, nose dropping, beginning an uncontrolled spin. Zelko fought the stick. Nothing. No response. The aircraft was dead, tumbling through the sky like a broken toy. Eject, eject, eject. The words came automatically, drilled into him through thousands of hours of training. His right hand found the ejection handle between his legs. He pulled. The canopy blew away in a shower of fragments. The rocket motor beneath his seat ignited, and Zelko was launched into the freezing night air at 600 miles per hour. The violence of the ejection was indescribable, a bone-crushing acceleration that slammed him upward, away from the dying aircraft. His helmet visor cracked, his oxygen mask tore loose. The wind ripped at his flight suit. Then the drogue chute deployed, stabilizing his tumble. A second later, the main parachute blossomed above him, jerking him upright with brutal force. Suddenly, the world went quiet. Zelko hung suspended in the darkness, swaying gently beneath the white canopy. Below him, his Nighthawk, the pride of American aviation, the invisible ghost spiraled downward in flames, trailing smoke and debris. It hit the ground 8 miles south of Belgrade with a dull thump that echoed across the countryside. a fireball rose into the night. He was alive, but he was also 40 miles deep in enemy territory, descending slowly toward a nation that wanted him dead. Zelko reached for his survival radio, his hands shaking from adrenaline and cold. The temperature at altitude was well below freezing. His breath came in ragged gasps. He keyed the radio. "Mayday, Mayday, Mayday, Vega 31 is down. I've ejected. Repeat, Vega 31 is down." The response was immediate. "Vega 31, this is Magic 86. We copy your Mayday, transmitting your position. SAR is being scrambled. Stay on this frequency. Search and rescue." They were coming, but it would take time. Hours, maybe. He had to survive until then. The ground rushed up faster than he expected. Zelko pulled on his parachute risers, trying to steer toward an open field, away from the roads and buildings he could see below. He hit hard, rolling through muddy farmland, the parachute collapsing around him. Pain shot through his left shoulder, but nothing felt broken. He lay still for a moment, listening. Dogs barking in the distance. Voices, vehicle engines. The Serbs knew something had come down. They'd be searching. Zelko gathered his parachute, stuffing it into a drainage ditch, then pulled out his survival kit. Compass, signal mirror, water purification tablets, a 9mm pistol with 2 magazines. Not much against an entire country. He checked the radio again, still transmitting. The rescue team would home in on his signal. He moved quickly, staying low, heading away from the crash site. Every instinct screamed at him to run, but training overrode panic. Slow and steady. Don't leave tracks. Find cover. Wait for rescue. 8 hours later, as dawn broke over the Serbian countryside, 2 American HH-60 Pavehawk helicopters roared in at treetop level, escorted by A-10 Warthogs and F-16 seconds. They found Zelko hidden in a thicket 3 miles from where he'd landed. The extraction took less than 2 minutes. By the time Serbian forces arrived, the helicopters were already across the Bosnian border. Darrell Zelko had survived. But the myth of the F-117's invincibility had not. The shoot-down sent shockwaves through NATO command. For the first time in history, a stealth aircraft had been detected, tracked, and destroyed by a surface-to-air missile system designed during the Kennedy administration. Zoltan Dani became a national hero in Serbia. His battery was never caught. They continued operating throughout the war, moving constantly, hunting for more Nighthawks. Years later, Dani and Zelko would meet face to face, 2 warriors from opposite sides of a conflict, sharing mutual respect. Dani would explain his tactics, the low-frequency radar, the short exposure times, the careful study of NATO patterns. Zelko would describe the moment the missile hit, the terror of ejection, the long night waiting for rescue. The F-117 would continue flying for another 9 years before being retired in 2008, but March 27, 1999 marked the end of an era. The night a Serbian colonel with obsolete equipment proved that in war, ingenuity and determination could still defeat even the most advanced technology. The Nighthawk had been shot down, and warfare would never be quite the same.